The cuts announced this week hardly came out of the blue, but the country's still grappling with the sheer scale of them. So far, the big row's been about who the biggest losers will be. But could slashing state provision make us more self-sufficient and leave us in a better state? Well, Douglas, do we face a leaner, stronger state or a nastier, crueler one, as some claim?
Well, it's certainly not going to be like the Blitz. Look, what's been happening is that for some years now, this country has been living way beyond its means. There's nothing moral about borrowing money that gets our grandchildren and great-grandchildren into debt. That's what's been happening. Like any household, the country has to balance its books. It can't borrow beyond its means. That's what we've been doing. That's what has to stop.
All right, I know Derek and George want to have their say on this.
Somebody has to do something about it.
Douglas, you haven't had a chance to come back after your initial comment, but I just want to ask. Firstly, Derek Hatton says there's something macho about asking the question, could it be good for us? So firstly, what's your response to that? And secondly, as a defender of them, do you think there is something about how people accept this message when it comes from people who they accuse of never having faced these problems in their life?
Sure, I mean, the first thing is, I do actually agree. I mean, there is an element in this of sort of talking out, this sort of, this is going to be tough, this is going to be difficult. Politicians like speaking like that. That's a political disease. That doesn't really, challenge the issue. The issue is that actually George underestimated what the last government did. I'm not a party political person, so I'm not making a party political point, but they didn't just take us near bankruptcy. They took us way beyond bankruptcy to a situation where we were borrowing at a level which cannot be sustained. It cannot be sustained what we were doing. So the question then is how you get out of this. Now, I agree, for a lot of people it looks, they think, oh, they see David Cameron, they see George Osborne, they think, oh, it's easy for you guys to say this. The truth is, look, we elect politicians to try to make decisions on our behalf. Anyone who took over this last election was going to have to make these decisions. If it had have been David Miliband or Ed Miliband in charge, they'd have done it, because the fact is that Gordon Brown wrecked the economy and couldn't admit it.
The issue, though, now, quite apart from the party politics, as you've said, Douglas?
Well, if I can just, the first thing in particular, 500,000 unemployed. Look, this is a fallacious argument. The state sector, the public sector, has grown terribly obese in recent years, in recent decades indeed, under Tory and Labour governments. That needs to be cut in order to allow private enterprise the opportunity to flourish.
Is it moral if there is a disproportionate effect on women?
I don't accept there is a disproportionate effect on women, but the point is that this country has to be able to pay for itself. The public sector does not create wealth, the private sector does. If you penalise the sector that actually creates wealth and protect the one that does not, you have the situation we're currently in. So we need those job losses.
From the Fawcett Society, and this evidence has been collated, that it is going to be disproportionately hard on women. Can you still argue that the cuts are good for us?
I simply don't accept that is the case. People will be made unemployed, but that does not mean that they are unemployed in perpetuity. It means that they will be hopefully be employed by other sectors of the economy.
You're missing a point. You've got to look behind why.
We have a moral obligation to look after those people with the kind of workers who might lose their jobs.
Look, I mean both the callers, I can say so, have made fallacious arguments on this. The first one's, and rather kind of scaremongering ones. The first person said this is attacking women. The second has brought in the Baby P case. Look, the problem in the Baby P case was not that there was not enough public sector involvement in it. It was that in our society we have families that have fallen apart, communities that don't support each other. This is not simply, if a child is abused by something, it isn't just the state's responsibility.
Simon,
I can give one other example of that.
I mean, just on Baby P case, we talked this before.
The situation is as follows. We have become welfare junkies. We've become, as a society, terribly reliant on the state. I'm afraid you've seen it in a lot of the arguments we've had this morning. If something goes wrong, the state must be able to answer it. As a great example of this recently, I was speaking to somebody, an elected representative, who described an elderly man coming to his surgery who came across the city, was ill, took a great effort to get there, and got to the surgery to say that his door handle needed replacing. Now, by the hundreds of pounds that were needed at that point for the council to send somebody out to survey the situation, for somebody else to come in and do it, does the man not have a neighbour? Does he not have friends? Does he not have family? This is a bigger question, is what we are becoming as a society.
Adrian has emailed us. Some recent studies have shown that children brought up by two lesbians do better than their classmates across a range of measures. Is that a surprise? And where does it leave dads? The Reverend Sharon Ferguson says this should make us stop and think. She's head of the lesbian and gay Christian movement. She's also been a foster mum. Here's her Sunday stand. Let's find out what Douglas Murray thinks as well.
I suppose two things. One is the first thing is I suspect that evidence that show that you cite might be slightly, as it were, warped by the following, which is that in my observation, gay couples who have children, adopt children, are, as it were, well, let's not be too anatomical, but you don't suddenly discover if you're a gay couple that one of you is pregnant.
You don't
there's not an accidental pregnancy, as it were. Gay parents tend to have thought about it for a long time, to have planned for it, to have a lot of expense at sometimes. So to that extent, it's more likely the child is going to be prepared for in that way.
Yeah.
But there's a second thing, I suppose, is just a tactical thing, as it were, which is I have a problem with your thesis, which is this, is that gay equality was argued precisely for that equality, not worse than anyone else and not better than anyone else. And to that extent...
Would you rather to be able to say gay parents can make great parents and leave it at that,
absolutely,
rather than better?
They can be as good as caring, but I think it's an insult to the straight community, as it were, across the country.
Two very distinct perspectives there, Reverend Sharon Ferguson. How do you respond? Well, it's time now for what our three guests here thought were the big moral moments of the week. Sharon, yet another thing to have to think about if you're getting hitched. The prenup reared its head this week.
It did indeed.
Hear about prenups. They think it takes the romance out of marriage, some people. And also the fact that, is there an opportunity to change your mind? Douglas, what strikes you morally about?
There's a cartoon in one of the papers this morning of a man drunk in a bar saying to a friend, we broke up over the prenup. It's a conversation I think most couples would have fairly frankly in some way anyway. I have to say, I think it enormously takes out the romance element of a relationship. I mean, the idea, if you agree that, your worldly goods are shared, that's not a bad place to start. But the idea you divide it up before you've even made the agreement would be not a great idea.
George.
One of the things that I do...
Hello, George. Some religious wrangling over these yellow cartoon characters.
Oh, this... hardly the most important story of the week, but the idea that the Catholic Church are laying claim to Homer Simpson and Bart Simpson as Catholics, when really, in my church, we're trying to get real people through the door.
Would you like to claim them for your own, the Simpsons?
Oh, well... I think they've been described as Presby Lutherans, whatever that is. But it's a bit of a corker. In the Vatican newspaper, they've said that the Simpsons are Catholic, and they base this on a 2005 episode, one episode, where they actually went to the Jesuit priest and were considering becoming Catholics.
Have they been misinterpreted, Douglas?
Well, I don't know what it is with religious leaders and the Simpsons. If you remember, the Archbishop of Canterbury expressed himself a huge fan a while ago. I have to say, it's always, for non-believers and believers alike, I think, it's always a bit of a shame when you see the established churches, which have so much power, so much ability, so much wealth of things they can tell people, to sort of debase themselves into arguing over yellow cartoon characters.
Well, the reason they do that is that they're trying to be relevant.
Yes, and popular. Douglas, I did promise Derek Hatton a little bit earlier on the programme we were going to discuss retirement ages, and they know how to show the government how they feel about things like this. Pension age over across the channel.
Absolutely. There are students, and a familiar side of students in Paris rioting, indeed even children at the lycée, the schools, rioting on the streets of Paris about the raising of the retirement age from 60 to 62, something which for the people in this country, I mean, it'd be fantastic to think of retiring at 62, but across the channel it's unthinkable to a lot of people. I think there's a very serious point in this, though, which is that our society here and across the world has to realise the following, which is that, I mean, in Britain in recent years, 50 years ago, then you were expected to survive a few years after retirement. Now it's 20, 30, sometimes 40 years. We read this week of children being born now expecting to live routinely into their 90s. And society has a very big question to ask about its finances and about its state if people are going to spend as long in retirement as they were working, because we can't finance that.
And we have another